My name is Bryce Wolf. I'm a solution architect here at TopStep, and I appreciate everybody for joining. So what we're going to cover today as we look at the OpenAir October 2021 release, we're going to take a look at the redesigned user experience. So OpenAir has really been putting a lot of time and effort of their development work into redesigning that user experience. So through all of the UI updates, they continue to add more out with each release. And so we'll take a look at some of those today. We're also going to look at the Project Center enhancements. There's some good stuff that has been released with the October release. We'll take a look at it a little bit more in depth, but it's nice to see that they're continuing to put more into the Project Center, which is a great way to be able to view bookings and other things on your project itself, making that project a destination within OpenAir. We're also going to take a look at some of the NetSuite connector updates. So some good stuff that's come out here for the connection between OpenAir and NetSuite. So we'll take a look at that, along with some of the platform updates that have been made to OpenAir. So OpenAir, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is its own platform. It's not built on anything else. It is built on OpenAir. So it's more than just a tool. It is a platform that can handle a lot. So we'll take a look at some of those platform updates, and then some bonus call outs as well. Some things that we think were great with the release that we'll take a quick look at and see what they are and how you might be able to take advantage of them. As we go through this release review, we'll try and answer some of these questions, like, will this feature impact me? There are some things that might not impact you. For example, if your organization doesn't use NetSuite and you just use OpenAir, that's connected to a different ERP system, then those NetSuite connector updates really won't mean a whole lot to you. But we'll go through and we'll talk about whether or not it's going to impact you, how something might be able to benefit your organization. So the project schedule updates that we'll take a look at might be something that could be of use to you if you're using bookings for resourcing. So we'll take a look at that. And then if there's any limitations or any considerations for these new features that you might be deploying. So we'll take a look at that as well. The first thing that we're going to jump into today is the redesigned OpenAir user experience. So throughout the last several releases, they've continued to add more things to this new user experience. So the first thing that we have are the adaptive screen headers. So for a long time, if you were using OpenAir on an iPad or even an iPhone, it didn't render very well. So now, as you can see in the top right, we've got things that collapse down on top of one another a little bit better. So if you have less screen real estate that you're working with, you'll still be able to make full advantage of OpenAir with these adaptive screen headers. So it's going to redraw based on the size of the screen that you're on, instead of having to scroll all the way over to the side to try and get to the project properties page, to get to your project progress bar. So with these adaptive screen headers, it's really great for whenever you're using a smaller screen. We've also got additional redesign list views. This is something that with each release, there continue to be more and more that have been redesigned. So we've got one here with the jobs and rates as we go across with the cost centers as the example that's shown there. So those are some nice things with these redesign list views and those tab navigation changes as you go through. So as they continue to come out with more UI changes, these are going to be things that we'll see more and more get updated until they've completed all of those navigational panes within OpenAir. And then another thing that I really like is the new date picker that's going to be available on more places whenever we're going through and setting our dates. So it's available a couple more places now, and we'll continue to see that get rolled out across other places in the system. So this new date picker that we have, it's familiar, I'm sure, to some of you. For some parts of the system, you're going to start to see it pop up more and more. So the new date picker is really nice, much easier to use than the previous version that you do still see throughout the system. So for the redesigned user experience, is this going to impact you? Yes, it's going to impact everybody. If you're not using the new UI now, you will be as of April 2022. So it's something to really make sure that you take advantage of. It's recommended that everybody really tries to get on that new UI as soon as possible to be able to familiarize your organization with it. That way it's not a shock to the system on the April release whenever it's no longer an option. You can't put it off any longer. That new UI is going to be pushed out to everybody in the April release next year. So with the new UI, with the redesigned user experience, there's a number of benefits that you get. So we just took a look at some of them through the list views, through the date picker. There's a lot of great stuff that comes with it. So the user experience really is changing through OpenAir. They're trying to make it more consistent throughout the product, which I think is fantastic for user adoption. And there's no longer it looks one way here, it looks one way there as you move throughout the projects module, resources module. It really becomes more consistent, creating a better user experience. So again, April release next year. This is something that is going to be pushed out. So it's good to look at it now, review everything that's coming out with it. If you can push it out to your users now, if you're not using it, it's something that we definitely recommend because it's a great change over the old UI. So the new UI is something that you won't have a choice with as of April 22. So it will be good to get familiar with it as soon as possible. And with all of these new features, not just the user experience, but with everything, it's recommended to enable it in your sandbox first and go through and test it. Especially if you're moving on to the new UI, it's going to be really important to update any training materials that you have, anything else that you need to do to be able to manage the change that will come to your organization with the new UI. The last thing that you want is to have your users log in after that April release and everything has changed and they're not aware of it. So with the changes to the user experience, with that new UI, it's recommended to deploy it to the sandbox, test it out, update any training materials that you have, make sure that those admins and power users are familiar with those changes. There will be navigational changes that will impact everybody from somebody entering time to a project manager and a resource manager. It's going to be good to make sure that they being the admin and the power user, they have the familiarity with these changes so that way they can help the rest of their user community with all the changes that have come with the new UI. The next thing that we're going to take a look at are some of the Project Center enhancements. So the Project Center came out a few releases ago, and they're continuing to put more development work into it to make it even better. So that Project Center really helps drive home that project is going to be a destination within the system. So those project managers, whenever they log into OpenAir, it's now really going to be their focus. They can go to the project that they're working on, and they can do everything now within that, especially now that we have this Project Center. So Project Center is going to have some great new stuff like the project schedule recalculation. We've got task drag and drop refreshes for those hours booked. So if you're using the Project Center to update those booked hours, those are going to be refreshed as you drag and drop tasks around. So you can now set task phases and task and phase dependencies within the system and have these simplified Gantt charts. So what this really means is that you can now use booked hours for your task to drive the schedule. So where we before had to use assignments to really drive that schedule forward, we now have the option to come through and have this set based on the booked hours. And we can set dependencies, we can set lag time, as we can see here, within this Project Center using these booked hours to drive the schedule forward. So it's a great update that really, if your organization is using those booked hours instead of assignments, or if you've been using assignments simply because you needed to drive a schedule forward, but really booked hours are what you're doing, then this is going to be a great feature for you to test out and look at deploying. And the simplified Gantt chart, it really brings it all together. So we can see that on the screen here, where we have this easier view to be able to look at the hours as we have across for the tasks as they go, along with the hours that a resource has been booked on that project. So we see the number of hours that they've been booked there on a week-by-week basis, and we see the task as it goes across, spanning those weeks, because we have resources that have been booked on those tasks. So it's a lot of great stuff that has come out to make the Project Center even more relevant for your organization, and to really streamline the process of using OpenAir to drive that schedule, to have those bookings be the driver of that schedule, rather than having to go through and do your bookings and then do your more granular planning on the resource task assignment. So will this impact me? If you're using the Project Center and you're using the booking worksheet, Project Center booking worksheet in the outline view, then you'll see the simplified Gantt view within that. So that's something that you'll see those changes as you go and you log in now. So if you're going through and you're using the start and the finish dates and planned hours, you can have them be driven on the booking. So if you're using those bookings, you have the option now to be able to drive that forward with the Project Center. So it's going to be a great thing for you to use. There will be some things to keep in mind with it, because there are parts of the system that do use assignments and do use those assigned hours to be able to drive certain pieces of functionality in the system. So it is something that you'll want to test, want to make sure that you go through and fully understand the impact of changing from using task assignments to solely using bookings, because there are certainly things there to keep on the lookout for. So for the Project Center, for these schedule updates, for everything that's been done there to drive the project schedule based on the bookings, there's a lot of great benefits. So that Project Center is now going to have that visual overview for your project schedule that's based on the bookings. So you'll be able to see your Gantt driven by the bookings that you have in the system, which is where if you are using those bookings and you're updating those resource bookings every week to make sure that the right allocation is there for the resources, you'll be able to see that as you view it within your Gantt view on your project. So that way you've always got a fresh view of the data in your project schedule. And then if you're doing more complex project planning within OpenAir and setting dependencies on the tasks, you can then use those booked hours to drive your project schedule. So beyond just going through and updating your booked hours on the project, by setting those dependencies, you can really drive that schedule and have everything be driven off of those bookings within the system. So there certainly are some considerations if you're deploying the Project Center and focused on the enhancements to it specifically. Is the Project Center must be visible to the user. So it's a role permission. There are switches that need to be enabled to make this possible within the system. So those need to be requested from OpenAir support to be able to have them. And then really big with this one is the project schedule calculations, to have them based on bookings. It's on a project by project basis. So it's not something that you just turn on in the system and then your schedule is driven by bookings. There's a custom field that would need to be created on that project properties page, and it'll need to be enabled on a project by project basis. So it's certainly something to keep in mind. And it's nice if you want to try and pilot this with 1 or 2 projects. So if you've been a longtime user of bookings and assignments, and you've got a PM that is willing to give it a try to really drive the schedule by these bookings rather than task assignments, it's nice with it being done on a project by project basis, because you can try it out. So you can go through, and it's definitely recommended to test this in Sandbox. But once that testing has taken place and you can validate that everything's going to work as far as your reporting needs with it, it's great to pilot it out with a couple of projects and see if that's going to work for you. See if that's going to work for some of those stronger, more advanced PMs within OpenAir that are using it, they are great candidates to go through and try this new feature out, see how they like it, see if they like the way that booking is going to drive the schedule rather than the task assignment. So it's a great feature. There's lots of good stuff with it. With it being enabled on a project by project basis, if you have some people that prefer to use the task assignments and keep everything separate, then that's something that can still be in place. So some good stuff, definitely recommended to test it out, but overall a strong enhancement to the project center. The next thing we're going to take a look at are some of the NetSuite connector enhancements. So for everybody that's using NetSuite and using NetSuite and OpenAir together, there are a number of great things that came out with this latest release to strengthen the connection between the two systems. So there's a real-time import validation. So it's making sure that everything is able to come through. The connector settings history is really useful with the last release where we had the admin form that was available to be updated. We can now go through and we can view those changes that have been made. So being able to go through and view the changes that have been made, who made them, it's going to be something that's really useful for an audit of that connection. If something's no longer working as it should have been, you can go through and you can see if a change was made to see if that's the cause of the integration not working the way that it had been before. The connector health check is going to be really great as well. It's to go through and make sure that you've optimized the connection, that you're using the latest recommended features and settings for it. So the health check is going to be something that the system will tell you if you're using the latest and greatest as far as those settings between the connection between NetSuite and OpenAir. And then the connector admin form, so that's something that came out in a previous release, but that's going to be important to be able to take advantage of the connector settings history along with the health check. And then for those people that are using SuiteTax, there is now compatibility between using the integration between NetSuite and OpenAir. So will this impact you if you're using NetSuite and OpenAir? Yes, it definitely will. If you're not, then no, it's not going to. If you're just using OpenAir, then you can tune out for the next minute or so as we go through the changes for the connectors. We talk about those. So the connector changes it really helps to bring together the traceability within the system. So those connection points that we have between NetSuite and OpenAir, it's really important to be able to make sure that everything's staying intact and that we have the latest and greatest features that are enabled in the integration. So as I mentioned, we can see that audit of changes that was made to the connector, and we can see the description of those changes that were made. So if there was a workflow that was turned off, we'd be able to see who turned it off and which workflow they turned off. So some good stuff there for the NetSuite connector and those changes as part of the October release. Just some things to remember in general for the NetSuite connector. The workflow export doesn't support those advanced mappings and does not update the records. And the NetSuite connector admin must be enabled for the custom workflow export. So if you're not a NetSuite admin, work alongside a NetSuite partner, work alongside your NetSuite admin to make sure that we've got everything in place and that everything is being optimized to connect NetSuite and OpenAir. There have been some platform updates to OpenAir with the latest release. So there have been some updates to the REST API, to the token validity for Auth 2.0, and then there's also some updates for the scripting support between the NetSuite integration for a workflow group. So some great stuff as far as the platform goes. With the scripting especially, now you can go through and you can create workflow groups to run the integration for the specific workflow groups with these scheduled scripts. So with these changes to scripting, allowing it to work together with the NetSuite connector, it's a really great enhancement that really can change the way that integration works to bring across the data for you. And if you're using OAuth 2.0 tokens, it's something that you can go in now and you can update that token lifetime and refresh the lifetime of the token. So some good changes there for the platform, just to see that strength behind the OpenAir platform and to see the development team continuing to strengthen the platform as it is. Some bonus callouts that we have here for OpenAir Integration Manager. There are some updates to it to allow for the QuickBooks 2021 with the 21.0 endpoint on it. There's also the extension of CSV export filtering. So if you're running exports from Integration Manager, there's additional filtering that you can do within Integration Manager now. So some nice changes there. For the OpenAir Help Center, there's some updates that have been made. It's now a place where you can go to access release notes and any relevant documentation that you have. So Suite Answers is a good place to go for your queries within the system. The Help Center is going to be a great place to go to grab release notes, relevant documentation, all within that Help Center. So within the Help Center as well, there's the NetSuite connector health check and the admin form for the NetSuite connector. So nice to see those changes within the Help Center there for OpenAir. So Suite Answers is still there, still going to be a great repository of information for questions that you might have within the system. The Help Center just is another piece to add to that information arsenal that you have when working within OpenAir. So for publishing reports, if we're using the BI connector with the OData feeds, you can now send OpenAir report data to NetSuite. So if you have people that are working just in NetSuite, we're able to, with this BI connector, send report data to NetSuite to drive KPIs and metrics within that system. So now it can be something that if your sales team, if somebody needs to see that project related data, something that was previously just contained within OpenAir, now using the BI connector, those reports can be published to send data to NetSuite. And also leveraging the BI tool, it's something that with the filter builder for defining conditions for export workflows from NetSuite to OpenAir, we can now use this if we're using that BI tool to be able to build these filters for different conditions for the export workflows. There was the expense update for attachments in the April release. They've continued to refine the expense updates that they had with this October release. So now the drag and drop feature has been extended to attaching all files in a folder. So just nice to see those continued changes there to the expenses. And not mentioned here, but worth noting, it's not something that has been released yet, but it's something that OpenAir has said is going to come out late 2021, which is the redesigned expense module within the mobile app. So that's something that related to all of the expense attachments, being able to enter those through the UI. Coming soon is the mobile app redesign for expenses. And that again is targeted by the development team for late 2021. So that's something that's just going to continue to make the user experience a lot better for those that are entering expenses within OpenAir. So just to bring it all together for this release, for every release, make sure that you've tested out everything in your sandbox, especially with the redesigned user experience. Coming next spring, it's going to be something that you have to change to. So prepare now. If you haven't started yet, start now. Go through, update your sandbox so that way you can get ready for all of those training materials, for everything else that you have, to avoid that confusion on the day when the new UI is released with that spring release for OpenAir. So go through, test it out, make sure that you know which features are going to be able to work for you. So this is different from the UI, from that user experience. Any new features that you've seen in this release, in previous releases, make sure you test them out first. There's some that don't really require a lot of testing, but you should still test everything out. Before you deploy it to your production instance, go through and test it. Make sure that the features are going to work for you, and make sure that they're going to provide value. They're going to benefit the organization. They're going to make that project manager's life a little bit easier to go through and update those bookings within the project center. It's going to make that resource manager's life a little bit easier because they have a better calendar view to look at whenever they're going through and doing the date selection for an availability search. So just make sure you test them out, make sure that they add value to the organization. And then once you've gone through, you've upgraded the sandbox, you've tested everything, communicate it out to those impacted users. Because the last thing that you want to have is some great feature that you've tested out that's worked for the couple of people that you've tested it out for. And then a project manager that wasn't part of that team of testing it out, they log in and they see this project center. They might not know what it's going to be. They might not even use it because it's something that hasn't been communicated out. So they might not use it. They might not understand how it can be used. So train your teams not just on how to use it, but how it benefits them, how it's going to increase the accuracy of their reporting for their resources. There's a lot of great things that are out there as far as this release and previous releases, but if there's no communication for these new features that have been turned on within your system, even the best features aren't going to be adopted because the users don't know how to use them. So that communication, that training, that enablement is an important component of this release and any other release that we have within OpenAir. All right, so thank you everybody for your time. Feel free to reach out to us. Our website is here. You can follow our tweets and join the LinkedIn group that we have that's the OpenAir users, just to continue to expand that OpenAir knowledge. It's a great user community for OpenAir.